Dan Rubenstein at long last. We've arrived at preview season. Last episode, we talked through the big high-level stuff, all the things that are changing in the year of our Lord 2024 college football. Now it is time for the rubber to meet the road. Today, we've got the group of five. We're going to start off with the American and Conference USA in part one. In part two, we're going to do the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, and the MAC. But we're finally here. I'm excited. We're finally here to actually talk some teams and college football and conferences and all the good stuff we've waited all summer long for.
Yes, absolutely. And the good thing about, the G5 portion of this, and how I think we both hate sort of that term and lumping all of these conferences together because they are their own unique ecosystems that have brands and personalities and everything. But the great thing about, I think, what most, if not all of these conferences is there's no clear, obvious power across the board. And one of these teams, I guess I take that back in Liberty within Conference USA, but that's a sort of a different situation because they were that last year and they, got into the Fiesta Bowl against Oregon. That there is, I think we're going to delineate tiers here, but there is a fuzziness to where these teams fit in unique ways across different conferences. And I sort of love that. I sort of love that anybody who is confident in their hierarchy picks is wrong, is just absolutely wrong. And that's the fun of it all. And so this makes me very excited for this year in particular, because the nature of a number of these conferences is nothing but crazy change, not unlike major conferences, but it seems that the identities of so many of these teams is well, they could go 3-9 or 9-3. Based on, they got 71 new players and 3 new coordinators. That's the fun of sort of not being a fan of a specific team, because I think there's a lot of harrowing moments if you're a fan of whoever, North Texas or FAU or something, because of the unknown. But I don't know, from a pure TV show standpoint, there's a lot to love here. Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below.
There's a lot to love. It's a great TV show. And Look, I'm excited to do a 2-part group of 5 preview. I'm with you. We sort of don't have much love for the group of 5 moniker umbrella as a whole.
Right.
We don't mean to diminish any of these teams or conferences. It's just sort of the way that the sport has gone, and we need some way to classify it, so we'll roll with it. But we've never done a 2-part preview before. And as you and I talked in the off-season and now into the preseason, we just kind of felt dirty about putting it at the very end, just going through all of this information in 1 hour. 1 hour is not enough to talk through the minutia and the details and the things that we think make all 5 of these conferences unique. So we're going to get into that. We're going to give them their due. We're going to start off with these 5 conferences this year as opposed to what we've done in the past. And I'm excited about it. We've put in, I can't even tell you how many hours of research to make sure we're up to speed, that we can talk knowledgeably about it. And this year we've got a different format that we're going to follow. It's not complicated by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it plays into what makes college football great. To start things off, just because there is going to be a G5 representative in this new playoff system, you and I are going to talk through our championship tiers. The teams in our research that we feel have a real run at that G5 invite. Who are they? How do we rank them? Just from a very high level. After that, then we're going to get into individual conferences. And the theme for how we're going to approach each conference and each team within is danger. 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 Are you feeling dangerous? Are you not feeling dangerous? Each team, each conference, why are they dangerous? Why are they not dangerous? Could they pull an upset?
Yeah.
Are they going to be upset?
Sorry. That won't be the last time I play that stab.
That's all we have. That's all we got. 1 second of Kenny Loggins. But alas, is that not the very fiber of college football? Can they pull an upset? Will they be upset? That's what everybody cares about.
Are they clearly dominant? What makes them so dangerous and dominant? What is it about this team that makes them, not just dangerous, but also like a big time playoff contender? There's a difference between, dangerous, I think, has a ceiling, right? You're dangerous until you're great. You're great. You just don't question greatness, right? That it's sort of self-evident. Dangerous is sort of the last stop on the greatness train. And so we want to find, this is all nonsense, Ty, you know this. But we want to find the levels, right? The magnitude of danger or lack thereof in these conferences, in potential contenders to make the college football playoff. And I have no idea what your list is in terms of playoff contenders among the G5 ranks. And I don't think you have any idea of what mine is. And that makes me excited. I'm great.
Absolutely. With it. The only other thing that I will add, I promise you, there isn't a whole lot of setup required.
No.
For any of this. For those watching the video version of the show, I've got Take a Toe behind me.
That's true.
More takes. Why it burns.
As we go through, as we start talking through these teams, and I think specifically as we get into the power conferences, when we have more informed predictions to offer, this is when Take a Toe is going to shine. It's been dormant the last couple months. It's been hiding in the other room that's adjacent to my studio here. But we're going to throw some of our takes and predictions and just oddball thoughts into the volcano. I'll keep track of them all. At some point, we'll have a Take a Toe review episode.
Yeah.
It will smoke. I charged the battery on the contraption. I've also looked it up. Apparently, whatever the smoke is that's coming out won't give me lung cancer. So we're good.
Okay.
In that department, at least that's what the internet says, for whatever Google's worth. If you are new here, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our preview episodes. Of course, all are welcome in the Verballerhood. If you've been here a while, tell your friends that we started up our previews. Of course, they're welcome to stop by as well. Leave a rating or review wherever you can. And if you are a super Verballer, Verballers.com. Verballers.com. We haven't updated the Patreon tiers yet. We'll do that as we get a little bit closer to the season. But things are starting to ramp up. More people are starting to join. Hop on over to the Discord, talk through. Obviously, I would expect people are going to be talking through our previews here to tell us where we're right, where we're wrong. And wherever it is you're listening, let us know. solidverbal@gmail.com. What we could do better, what you think we got wrong, what you think we got right.
Right. Correct.
Let's start this off, Dan.
I'm ready.
There is going to be a G5 rep in the playoff this year.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume, maybe it's a bad assumption, that it's going to be the number 12 seed in the playoff. There are scenarios in which that would not be the case. I think we talked through them on the last episode. Give me your list of true G5 contenders for that one and only playoff spot.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be the case that they're 12. I mean, last year it was very clear that Liberty was the low man on those New Year's 6 games, but we've seen seasons in which, an undefeated Cincinnati and undefeated Boise State are hovering around 5 and 6, not necessarily in college football playoff rankings with, Boise State's height pre-playoff, but certainly we could see, especially with some of these teams scheduling up like they kind of have to do, that you could have that huge signature win that vaults you above that number 12 spot. And so what I like to do in looking at a potential playoff contender and somebody who could actually compete in the playoff is just like, okay, it's one thing to look relatively complete and well coached, but what do you do excellently? Is it a Luke Fickell defense? Is it a Chris Peterson offense, right? That to me is generally the difference on the margins between teams who can avoid that like weird down week, that they can lean on something excellent to, run the table or whatever, or give, in the case of like, I think Fresno State has Michigan early on, like to give a team like that a good amount of that dangerous feeling that we're talking about. And so I don't know. I think you start with the most obvious candidate because of their schedule and conference. It's Liberty to me, because they did it last year. They return a good amount. They lose a star receiver, but Kaidon Salter came back into the roster from the portal. And so there's a good amount to like about Liberty. They have App State this year, but their schedule is still incredible, and Conference USA is just, they're not fielding a team on Liberty and Jamey Chadwell's level right now. So that's obvious candidate number 1 for me. Do you have them in your candidates?
Well, they're obviously in my candidates,
yeah.
Right? I've got 7 teams listed here, and I have ranked them in this order. Okay. My number 1 is App State.
Okay.
My number 1 is App State. We will talk about App State in part 2 in more detail when we break down all things Sunbelt. But I like where App State's at. I like where their offense is at. Their defense has been trending downwards the last couple years, but I'm hopeful that they might have a chance to rectify that this season. I just think they're really strong. Of all these teams that I looked at, I think they're the strongest, in my opinion.
Also in a Sun Belt that's a little bit more gettable with the loss of some coaching and player talent, of course, not the least of which James Madison and Kurt Signetti. I have Boise State.
Boise State's my second. Yeah, I've got Boise State too on mine.
Okay, I didn't order mine. I just sort of have a corral of playoff threats.
Sure.
Boise State is interesting because of the way they finished the season last year. Their schedule's pretty good. They have Oregon week 2 or week 3, and so we'll have a good sense of what Boise is or is not. They had Washington last year, and they were not last year. Yeah. And they move on from Andy Avalos. But, when you have one of the best, 3 or 4 running backs in the world, in the college football universe, in Ashton Genty, they start out from a good place. He has a good line in front of him. Their schedule shouldn't be terrible. Boise, I think, depending on where they are at quarterback, I think they should have a good amount of firepower on offense, and the defense should be improved. Boise, I think, is the probable clear favorite in the Mountain West, which should give them a good leg up.
Yeah, I've got App State 1, Boise State 2 in my power ranking. I've got Liberty 3. You mentioned it just a minute ago, but App State and Liberty do play this year.
Yeah,
and I think it's sometime in October. I'll pull it up when we talk through these teams. That's in effect a potential play-in game for the playoff between those two, because you got to expect Liberty's going to go through the Conference USA without much resistance. I just think head and shoulders they're better than all the other teams. And there are some interesting schools that we'll talk through, but I think Liberty is the clear favorite there, as you mentioned. And App State, I really like App State. I like the fact that they scheduled Liberty. I like the fact that Liberty scheduled App State. I like the fact that we get that game. I think App State's got a really good shot at winning the Sun Belt this year, though the Sun Belt remains interesting and has been interesting the last couple seasons. Liberty is 3 for me. I'm curious, though, outside of those 3 teams, if we're ranking them, Liberty, Boise State, or App State, Boise, and Liberty, kind of those 3 in no particular order, what is kind of your next grouping of teams?
I would put Memphis in the group there just because of what they return and close losses last year. I would probably put Fresno State in that group. And the Fresno State thing is interesting. They return a good amount on offense. The defense hopefully is improved, but they have a bites at the apple situation where they have Michigan, Wazoo, and UCLA. And so, again, on the margins, if you're comparing resumes of a 1 or 2 loss Fresno and an undefeated Liberty, but we're talking about a win over UCLA or a win over Wazoo and close losses to, Michigan and UCLA or something like that. That to me, that scratches me where I itch in terms of, you have the tested coach in Jeff Tedford, who's been successful both at Cal and Fresno. Hopefully his health is in order. So schedule-wise, they're in a good place within the Mountain West. So I would include Fresno in that grouping.
Fresno could beat UCLA, Dan.
Of course they could.
They could beat UCLA. It's later in the year. It's a late game. I don't think they stand much chance against Michigan, although Michigan is kind of in.
It's early. I think Michigan's going to be really good this year, but I don't know.
I think Michigan will be really good as well, but Michigan's got their own change that they're undergoing at the moment. And UCLA might be a little bit more seasoned later in the year, but Fresno's a veteran team. Fresno could take them down. I've also got Memphis and Fresno,
Yeah.
in addition to Louisiana and Tulane to round out my 7.
Louisiana, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I like Louisiana this year. I wanted to include them if only because I included them as one of my contenders for the American.
Okay.
And the same is true for Tulane. Both of those programs are kind of dealing with their own elements of change that I'll talk through. Again, we're going to do the American as part of today's episode. I think you could make a case for them, but I rank them much lower, 6th and 7th on this list, just because I don't think it's as strong of a case. In reality, for me, it's 5 teams. It's 5 teams that I feel best about, and those are App State, Boise State, Liberty, Memphis, and Fresno.
Okay. With
a kicker of Louisiana and Tulane. Are there any other schools that you included that you wouldn't include? It doesn't sound like you're too high on Tulane or Louisiana.
Not this year.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other schools that I missed in mine?
I'm exceedingly curious about the tier in which, or your opinion of, and maybe we'll get there when we talk the American soon, UTSA.
Yeah.
Just because of the Jeff Traylor factor. Frank Harris is out of eligibility, but he has had a great eye for assistance. And even with the slow start last year, they get things in order. He's recruited quite well to San Antonio. So that's somebody where I'm like, okay, they could have a weird, like, under the radar this offseason, put it together. I think they are at Texas relatively early on. Schedule's not terrible. They've got a couple of those bigger games at home. That to me is interesting, that he's been there long enough and he has used the portal well enough that it could be more reload than rebuild.
Yeah, I think I misspoke. I think I said that we'll talk about Louisiana today. We're not going to talk about Louisiana today.
That'll be the second show.
That'll be the second show, yeah. I'm getting all these conferences mixed up because we studied all of them, and we're going to do all of our recordings on one day. So a lot of information.
Also, they all switch, right? It's one big swingers party between Conference USA and the American and the Sun Belt. Big key party.
Of feeling dangerous, Dan.
Yeah.
Hey-yo. Let's get into the American, shall we?
Let's.
Balls of fire! Tornadoes are coming! Run for your lives, boys! To the storm cellar! Hurry, boys! She's a coming!
The American.
Ooh, whoa, hey, okay, American.
The American. The AAC, as it were. Very interesting conference, as all of these are. We're going to do 5 conferences between this episode and next. I also did a secondary tier ranking of my teams in the American that I can use kind of right now as a guide for where I want to take this, because I was the one who did the deep dive of this conference. I think the 2 obvious contenders for me, and if you want to come up with any kind of danger-themed tiers, be my guest.
Okay.
You're the creative one between the two of us. I'm just the pace car here on this show.
Okay.
My 2 obvious contenders are Memphis and Tulane. I think it's obvious. Those are the 2 schools that far and away I think are the ones that are the 2 primary contenders here. Beyond that, though, the teams that are giving me the vapors, the teams that are making me feel dangerous, frankly. USF, about whom we have talked many times over here on this show, as well as UTSA, a team that you mentioned earlier. The teams that are, I think, in their own right feeling dangerous, that could pull an upset along the way, the Rice Owls.
Okay.
Army, a new addition to the conference, which I'll talk about in a second. FAU, the Owls, another owl in this group. And ECU, Pirates. And then the teams that I'm just sort of giving the wave off. Navy, North Texas, UAB, Tulsa, Charlotte, Temple. We're going to talk about all of these programs here, I promise you. But in terms of actually contending, winning, in upset capacity, I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
All right. I don't know if that jives with anything that you have read, that you put together. I know I did the deep dive here, but any points of contention with grouping those teams as such?
I mean, the Navy write-off, I understand why you're doing it. I don't know. I just have too much history writing off Navy and them having it's that random week that I still think they're dangerous, like a week 9 where they just get it all together. But I don't think that fully qualifies them as dangerous.
Well, the AAC now has 14 teams. Even though SMU left this year, they bring in Army. Army enters as a football-only member of the conference. And we mentioned it a little bit on the last episode while you bring up Navy. The Army-Navy rivalry is going to remain unchanged. They're going to continue playing it second Saturday in December as a non-conference game, even though both teams are in the same conference. So it does set up the situation, again, that we outlined on the last episode. Go back and listen, where in some future universe where Army and Navy are the top 2 teams in the American and they have to play for the conference championship in week 14, there could be an exhibition game between the 2 of them again on week 15.
Yes.
Unless they decide, they don't want to do that. But that makes it interesting. The other thing that makes it interesting is bigger picture. I do think it's probably the only conference in America that has 2 pure option teams like this. Is it not?
I believe so. Yeah.
Like, it sets up the hellish possibility of a double body blow. Mm-hmm. And UAB is the closest to kind of dealing with that this year because they've got Navy, Tulane, and Army on 3 consecutive weeks.
Yeah.
But thankfully, no 2 option games back to back, which I hope they do just for the hell of it at some point to keep things interesting for us on the podcast. But
yeah,
the whole Army edition, I think, is really cool.
Well, the good news if you're UAB is the defense is probably just going to be horrific anyway. So you're not going to be able to tell if there's an actual effect playing Army and Navy.
No. The other thing that I would add about the 14 teams in the American this year, 12 of them, per Bill Connolly's projections, 12 of them are at best half teams.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Either a really good offense and a bad defense or vice versa. The only two that aren't are UTSA and Tulane per that metric.
Yeah.
Both of them figure to be a lot more balanced on both sides of the football. Interestingly enough, Memphis, who I mentioned earlier, is not only the biggest half team per Bill Connolly's projections, but also the biggest, like the biggest. Not one of the biggest, they are the biggest.
Like the distance between their offensive projection, their defense projection in the American?
Huge.
Okay.
Huge. Biggest half team, but maybe the conference favorite.
Really?
Yeah.
More than North Texas?
Yeah.
Who might have the worst defense and had like a top 30 offense nationally last year?
Per projections.
That's wild. Okay.
Memphis looks to be the biggest half team.
Okay.
And then the final point that I'll add here before we dive in, and you can tell me where you want to go next.
Please.
As you alluded, there's a lot new across G5, but in this conference in particular. Just from a returning production standpoint, there are only 4 teams inside the top 50 of that metric. Rice is 5th nationally, and they return the most on defense of any team in the country. They're number 1. USF is 8th nationally. They have a more 5th, I think, 5th in the country in terms of what comes back on offense. And Memphis, 22nd overall, they return a lot on both sides. Navy is right in there at number 50 as well. But anytime you see that metric, either via transfers or graduation or whatever,
yeah,
there's a lot new in the American, which I think tends to kind of up the variance and increase the possibilities that you could see. So it makes it interesting.
And you'll see, guys in any of these conferences we're talking about, it's coming up from an FCS level or from another G5 conference, coming down looking for more playing time from a power conference. And, depending on how robust the NIL situation is, and it varies team to team, of course, conference to conference, is when you'll see a lot of Jags coming in, just guys, right? Just warm bodies and actual interesting contributor potential. And so it's sort of tough to sort out right now because a lot, it's either a competition thing or it's you just haven't seen this guy who's been the third string left guard for Texas these past 3 years play. But it throws the whole thing into a sort of mysterious vapor.
Where do you want me to start? Which team?
I don't know. Who's just doing it for you?
Memphis is doing it. For me. Memphis is doing it for me. Memphis went 10-3 last season. They beat Iowa State in the Liberty Bowl. They got in the zone, the AutoZone Liberty Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
They also played in 6 one-score games, and they won 4 of them. So the margin there was very thin. And more often than not, they came out in front. Memphis projects as the best G5 team this year, which, of course, is significant because of the playoff stuff that we discussed earlier. The biggest question for me is how they deal with their schedule. In particular, the home road splits, which are not favorable. They've got games against USF, UTSA, Tulane. All of them are on the road. I mention this for 2 reasons. A, it's pretty tough, especially considering they got to go, 12-1 to get into that playoff spot?
Yeah.
And B, they're going to need to play some defense to make it through. And I'm not sure they will or can. That's sort of the open thing with Memphis this year. I mentioned the half team thing, but it's a defense thing, really. They'll be able to play offense. I'm not concerned about that. Last year, they allowed 430 yards a game and 28.8 points per game. Almost everything was a shootout. So it's easy to have faith in the offense, which was really good last year and brings a lot back. Some questions about the offensive line, but for the most part, we're talking about Seth Henigan at quarterback, a very good wide receiver core led by Rock Taylor. A lot's back. There's a lot to like there. It's just a defense question, man. It's
kind of true of, but like every team in the American, in Conference USA, in the Sun Belt, Mountain West, like I just don't think you can hide great defensive players anymore because at real defense on a certain level, it's just who has the best players trying the hardest on defense, and you can't hide them. If you got a great edge rusher at UTSA, guess what? Texas wants him. And it, the days of what was the Toledo corner's name, Quinyon Mitchell, who was drafted in the first round.
Sure,
that's going to become so rare for him to stick around. And I'm impressed by it when it does happen. But when you look at a team like Memphis, who couldn't rush the passer at all last year, who gave up a ton of big plays,
that's right.
Like they can recruit and evaluate well. I just don't know how well they're going to be able to sustain and build a good defense. Any team to sustain and build a good defense over time in the portal era. So then you're looking at who has the savviest coaches, who has an offense that's inventive enough to score on anybody, and who has the schedule that won't get exposed and will at least get them to, you know, the stoop of the playoff. And in Memphis's case, I just don't think they're starting out from a good enough place on defense to really scare me that they're going to, you know, run the table this year.
Yeah, the offense will be there. They're going to score points. The personnel they have on staff, like they'll find a way to
super
score.
Strong. Yeah.
But the question is, can they do so in a way that every game isn't a shootout, where they actually do step up on defense? Ryan Silverfield took in 29 transfers to try and build up some quality depth to the point where you actually wonder if they're going to be able to gel in time for the season.
Right.
You know, we're not just talking about warm bodies to fill up the two deep. We're talking about quality depth that he built going out there and brought a lot of guys in. It's just that doesn't always take quickly.
Yeah, and it helps when you have that cash infusion from FedEx behind the scenes, right?
$25 million over 5 years. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
To your point of, can they build? Can they sustain? That's a serious investment.
Yeah.
That I think definitely puts Memphis at an advantage as compared to some of their peers on the G5
100%.
level. But that it takes time. You know, it takes time for that to kick in, for there to be a cohesive strategy, and for them to kind of infuse that program with more talent on a year in, year out basis.
Yeah.
The reason Memphis is dangerous is obvious. It's because they've got skill talent. They've got a very potent offense. The reason why they won't be dangerous is that constant threat of their defense bottoming out. I think they will be better on that side of the ball, but that's the risk. That's the risk. Also, the schedule, I mentioned the schedule just in conference, but they've also got a game early against Troy. I'm not particularly high on Troy for many reasons. I think people on this show know already. We'll talk about that in
That makes
part
me
two.
immediately think Troy's going 10-2.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. But also Florida State, they're on the road
Yeah.
in Tallahassee week 3. We will know a lot about Memphis pretty soon.
Great.
Won't be that long of a wait. But I'm pretty high on them. I just, you know, there are obvious issues.
Yeah, there are, as you mentioned, 8 to 10 teams who are willing to win or lose a game 45-42 in any given week.
The other team that I put atop of my contenders list in the American is Tulane.
Okay.
And it's for obvious reasons, right? I mean, Tulane was 11-3 last year. They lost to SMU in the conference title game. They lost to Virginia Tech in the bowl, but they went 8-0 in conference play during the regular season. The thing with Tulane that we need to pay attention to is that they replaced Willie Fritz. Willie Fritz left, went to Houston. Everyone loved the hire when he was at Tulane, and now when he's at Houston, everybody loves Willie Fritz. Just seems universal. And they replaced him with another guy that everybody loves, and John Summerall. He was 23-4 in 2 seasons at Troy. May or may not have been the hire of the offseason, depending who you talk to. That said, 96th in returning production.
Okay.
They're a little greener on defense than they are on offense, but their biggest loss was easily Michael Pratt, a name that we've talked about, I feel like, for an eternity on this show. He was an outstanding quarterback. He was there forever. Could have transferred to a bunch of big places before last season. I thought it was going to happen at Notre Dame. I had heard rumors about Michael Pratt to Notre Dame, you know, like middle of the previous season. It didn't come to fruition. They end up going with Sam Hartman instead. But now without Pratt, if you're trying to construct a case for why Tulane won't be as dangerous this year, it's because there probably is going to be a drop-off. The new quarterback is Ty Thompson. You could probably tell us more about Ty Thompson than anybody. He's the former 5-star from Oregon, yes?
Yeah, originally from Arizona, was at Oregon for a couple of years, and physically has a ton of potential, had been in a couple of big games and looked a little bit lost and just not ready for prime time, but seemed to improve over the course of the last year in garbage time through some nice balls, and the potential is there. And as we know, progress isn't linear, and you know, some guys need 2-3 years to really feel comfortable in their own skin as a somewhat major college football quarterback. And hope this new home works out for Ty Thompson, because he should have the opportunity. Kai Horton is back, right, as well. I don't know how much of a battle that is in this moment. Kai Horton looked pretty good in relief for Tulane when Michael Pratt went down. But ceiling-wise, it seems like Ty Thompson is the guy that owns that part of the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. They also have Mekhi Hughes back, their running back, who rushed for close to 1,400 yards last season as a redshirt freshman, which is awesome. That will help. It helps to kind of have that 1-2 punch. It's not going to be all on Ty Thompson.
Lost the big receiver to Tennessee, right?
Lost
Chris
the
Brazel, yeah.
Yep. The other thing that I would add that is really standing in Tulane's way, I think, of making the play, even if they win the conference, their schedule has both Kansas State and Oklahoma on it, back-to-back weeks. So from a conference standpoint, that does not factor in at all.
Right.
But from an overall playoff perspective, let's say they win the conference, but then we've got this data point of how they do against Kansas State and Oklahoma. 2 games they're probably going to lose. I don't think that helps their case.
Wait, is Tulane on a winning streak against Kansas State? Is my understanding correct that they're on a current winning streak against Chris Kleiman and the Wildcats? Yes?
Sure.
They beat them in 21.
Correct.
And I think they sort of put the fear of God danger into Lincoln Riley a few years ago.
They did. I mean, I don't think Tulane is going to be
different coach now. I understand.
A pushover opponent.
I agree.
But both of those games are early. And again, 96th in returning production, new quarterback. You don't have the veteran hand back there like they did before.
I agree.
It's just a different situation.
But they don't know what they're getting from Tulane this year, right? They're a mystery.
They are a bit of a mystery. So why is Tulane dangerous? They're dangerous because they've got a good coach. They're dangerous because I think they've shown consistency, and they still have a very talented roster. Right?
Yeah.
None of that stuff should be overlooked. Where they're not dangerous, there's just a lot new. They are that unknown. And I don't think the schedule is doing them a whole lot of favors. So I think that flies in the face a little bit of Tulane going on a deep run here this year.
Okay, fair enough.
Who are you interested in next? Next most among these teams, these 14 teams in the American?
I mean, do you have passing UTSA thoughts? I mentioned them as like in the sort of gray area of contention just because they've done nothing, no matter what conference. They're relatively new to the American, of course.
Yeah.
They compete. And so that to me is interesting.
Well, look, 9-4 last season. They beat Marshall in the bowl game. They started 1-3. I remember talking about that, like, whoo, going to be a rude awakening for UTSA going into a new conference, and then they ripped off 7 straight wins.
Mm-hmm.
They lost their season finale against Tulane, but they ended up with a pretty good season. And you got to feel good about UTSA just because Jeff Traylor's there. Like, Jeff Traylor gets interest every year from teams inside the state of Texas. And it feels like he's gotten that program to a very, very stable place. They're just good every year. The reason that I am not as high on UTSA, I'm still pretty high on them.
Yeah.
But can they replace Big Frankie Harris, our guy? At quarterback, he was there forever. Felt like an eternity. It was an eternity. He's easily, at present, the best player in the history of the program. Frankie Harris ain't walking through that door in 2024.
No, but he is available on a CD box set of the doo-wop legends of the 50s, Frankie Harris. Continue.
His replacement is Owen McCown, who is
related?
The son of Josh, the nephew of Luke.
Great.
Comes from quarterback pedigree. If not McCown, it'll be somebody by the name of Eddie Lee Marburger, who does sound like he's currently on the run from the feds, if I'm being honest. But I think that, for me, is the biggest question about UTSA at the quarterback spot. They just had a trusted hand year in, year out who could operate that offense, and now they don't. And so I expect there will be a bit of a drop-off there. Jeff Traylor will have that program playing at a pretty high level, as they have for the last couple seasons. That's just not a question to me. It's just, it's tough when you lose a guy of that caliber. You can't grow that on a tree and just put it out there on the field the next year. So Owen McCown might be the real deal. Of course, he comes from, like I said, quarterback pedigree, but I'm a little bit lower on UTSA this year just because they lose Big Frank.
Am I crazy in thinking that the most electric playmaker in the conference is somebody whose team we haven't mentioned yet?
Who's that?
Is it Byrum Brown at USF? Am I like
feeling dangerous?
You got
Thank
it.
you. Thank you.
I don't know. And they get what, Bama this year? They might get a couple big teams, but I know they're in Tuscaloosa. You remember that was like the weird rain game early on last year where it was shuffling of backup quarterbacks for the Tide. But, man, he's real good. He's fast. He throws a good ball. He's in a fun system. He's got to score 50 a game because they have no defense. Like, I'm pretty excited for the wild card nature of Byrum Brown.
7-6 last year. They shut out Syracuse 45-0 in their bowl game. Boca Raton Bowl. If you have listened to this show at all over the last few months, you know that Dan and I are both pretty high on USF. And the reason for that is pretty simple. They were 1-11 in 2022. The program was dead to rights. Jeff Scott was a tire fire. Alex Golesh comes in year one, knew everything. Suddenly an enormous jump forward, like a resounding shutout win in the bowl game, all of it with a redshirt freshman who you mentioned, Byrum Brown. And so to quote our friend Bill Connolly, almost all the reasons for last year's improvement return, which is a really good starting point.
Yes.
This is where the returning production stat actually matters, though. It should never be the only thing you look at when you're high on a team. It's always much safer when you've got some supporting detail, or when this is a supporting detail, I should say. When you can assume that we're going to get like incremental improvement instead of just the enormous leap forward, that's when it feels more comfortable. And Bill's right. Like all of the reasons for USF's jump forward last year are back, especially on offense where they got 9 starters coming back. Short of injury, short of unfortunate stuff that happens to every team, I have a really hard time believing that this offense isn't just going to continue improving, especially with an offensive-minded guy like Alex Golesh.
Yeah.
Right. The big key, though, is going to be keeping...
Great post-game interview, too.
Oh,
Alex
huge.
Golesh, yeah.
The big key is going to be keeping Brown upright, though.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know, outside of Jaden Daniels, he was the only quarterback in college football to throw for more than 3,000 yards and rush for more than 800?
Didn't know it. Makes sense. Didn't know it.
And also, he got sacked 43 times.
Yeah.
Which
That'll
was
happen.
tied for the 10th worst in college football. So, again, incremental improvement. Incremental improvement up front makes this offense a lot better. If they can get more out of Naquan Wright, their running back, they'll be better for it. He's a transfer. He came over from Florida, won the job last season, had a good statistical season, but it was really lumpy. Like a few great games, which pushed up the averages, but a bunch of stinkers sort of mixed in there. They got to get more out of him so that the pressure isn't all on Byrum Brown. On the defensive side, though, like this is the thing. They gave up at least 41 points in 5 of their 6 losses. That's not good enough, Dan.
No.
They did lose one game, only one game, where they gave up only 17 points. And that was the infamous
Bama game.
Buckner, Ty Simpson game against
Yeah.
Bama. Yeah. So this is a catastrophically bad defense. 2 years ago, last year, it was merely really bad. If you're a Bulls fan, you'll still take that. That's fine. It's progress. There were positives there. I think the effort stats like pressure rates and havoc rates, that stuff that, again, indicates are they trying, are they not trying? Those numbers were pretty good. They weren't bad at all. But they just gave up a ton of big plays. They got skewered through the air, especially when they played man coverage. They were just bad at doing that. The pass defense ultimately is what really let this team down. So, you know, as we kind of zoom out and look at what the landscape looks like, it's not an easy schedule, but it is extremely front-loaded. So within the first 5 weeks of the season, they go to Bama, they host Miami, they go to Tulane. If you zoom out a little bit more, there's a bye after that Tulane trip. Then they're back home against Memphis, which is going to be like an 85-point shootout. We know that. But the rest is manageable. If you get through that patch in the front part of the schedule, assuming the defense can just get a little bit more consistent, USF's going to be a damn fun watch this year.
You know who their defensive coordinator is?
Go ahead.
Todd Orlando.
Todd Orlando. That Todd
you know who their
Orlando
special
defense.
teams coordinator is? Some guy named Chad Creamer. And you told me this before. You have a few DVDs that star somebody named Todd Orlando and
Sure.
Chad Creamer from
All the
way
time.
back when.
Is
sorry,
Chad
Todd.
related to Chris Creamer of the sports logo fame?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I really do. No, USF should be fun. Todd Orlando, like, say what you will about his time at USC. It wasn't good, but he had too many stops where he was able to eventually build dangerous defenses that I think he should be able to because of how active USF will continue to be in the portal, I think he'll be able to build a defense at USF.
I think the ceiling is 8-4.
Okay.
I think the ceiling is 8-4, but I think they're going to put the fear of God into some teams because the offense is so damn good.
Okay. I think so too. And he'll be great for NC State next year, Byrum Brown. So there's that.
All right. Let's go to Army.
Okay.
I'm fascinated by Army joining this conference. I don't have a whole lot of deep Army takes here,
Okay.
but I think it's interesting what happened last year. Last year, they had, I'll say, noble intentions to try and modify the offense a little bit. That didn't take.
No.
It didn't take.
And they lose to Navy and don't
towards
score a
the
lot
end
of
of the
points in the
season.
process. Yeah.
Towards the end of the season, they just reverted back to what they had done many years prior. And then they actually built some momentum. They were just better at that. So I think this year that's going to be the marching orders, no pun intended. If Army can build on that, if they can get the offense merely back to a serviceable level, I am very curious about what that means for this conference. Because the best of Army, the best of any option team, grinds you down. And frankly, there are a lot of vulnerable defenses in this version of the American, right? Bill Connolly, in his preview of the American, talked about, generally speaking, a downward trend in the conference where they have essentially been forced to trade quality for quantity because of conference realignment, because of a number of factors. It's not just one thing. And so the American, after years of being kind of this beacon in the G5, this conference that we held up as being like the cream of the crop, that's not so much the case anymore. And there are just a lot of teams that are kind of teetering. And especially on the defensive side of the ball. That's where you see the weakness. That's where Army, that's where Navy present really interesting challenges, especially in just sort of the normal flow of a conference schedule where they're so different to prepare for. They grind you down so much when they're at their best. They could put some teams in a real pickle defensively. I don't know if it happens this year, but I'm glad Army is in this conference. I think it'll make things far more interesting than they were last year.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I like the specificity of it all. Like Memphis is going to be, have a big offense, and Army's going to run it, Navy's going to run it. Tulane should be relatively balanced. UAB is probably going to throw a bunch of checkdowns like they did all of last year. And surprise, surprise, Trent Dilfer runs an offense that features a bunch of checkdowns, efficient short passes or whatever. UTSA should be fun on offense. And then, you look at Tulsa seems like they're going to continue to be disappointing. Temple seems like they're going to continue to be disappointing. Charlotte, I'm at least intrigued because of Biff Poggi and bringing in a bunch of higher level transfers from big places. Yeah. FAU, there's no spark to me with FAU in this moment. ECU has been down. Maybe there's a spark there, but I don't know. There's a bunch of teams where you're just like, give me something. Please give me that reason to care about you.
Do you know who got the G5 playoff spot when they simulated a full season in the new EA college football video game?
There's a new EA college football video game?
I know. It came out of nowhere.
Weird. Okay. What team got that?
The Rice Owls got it.
Okay.
6-7 last season, lost a bowl game to Texas State. This year they lose both JT Daniels and Luke McCaffrey, and they're still 5th in returning production, which is kind of wild.
Great.
Their new quarterback is EJ Warner. You know who that is?
Temple. Yep.
From Temple, it's Kurt Warner's son. Yep. So it comes with some acclaim. The offensive line is enormous. I think they're going to be able to overpower a good chunk of the teams on their schedule. The defense is number 1 nationally, as I said earlier, in returning production. The win total per Vegas is 6.5. Rice is interesting. For our folks out on Discord who have been Rice fans for a while,
yeah,
this version of Rice is particularly intriguing to me.
Oh my God, Ty. Okay.
But don't laugh at me.
I'm laughing. Continue.
You don't have to laugh at me. We're all friends here.
Okay.
I am a Rice believer to some extent. I don't know what they're going to get out of EJ Warner. That to me is sort of the big open question. I think Rice could be very spicy in this conference. I think they could be just a real pain in the ass for everybody that they have to play. There's a lot back, but they got to get it at the quarterback position. They have to. That's all.
I agree.
That's all I'll say about that.
That's pretty much everybody. Yeah.
Laugh at me for Rice. How dare you?
Yeah. Continue. I always love who did you mention? It was EJ Warner at Rice.
Yeah.
Where you have I have no concept of if a player's a redshirt freshman or like a 6th-year COVID senior, that anytime I study any of these teams and any of these conferences, I just fully expect to see a name like, oh yeah, ECU brought in Kurt Bankert. And you're like, what? But it had, like, James Madison brought in Dylan Morris from Washington. I'm like, oh, cool. Dylan Morris ended up somewhere. Like, I have no idea, like, because of all of these names, because of all this movement, I lose full, complete track of eligibility years. Continue.
If we want to put it in Take a Toa, I can start Take a Toa up.
That Kurt Bankert is playing for ECU this year? That's my take?
I don't think Kurt Bankert's going to be playing for ECU.
Oh, damn.
Oh, more takes. Why?
That's such a good take. Actually, this Too Deep is incorrect. 2016 sophomore Kurt Bankert from Virginia. Virginia is going to be playing for ECU. I'm just going to refute
Kurt
depth
Bankert
charts.
making weird football content these days.
Is he?
He is, yeah.
Okay.
Grew
He's his
hair
own
out.
like JT O'Sullivan.
Yeah,
I've watched
yeah.
a lot of JT O'Sullivan. He's pretty good, actually.
I'm going over on that 6.5 win total for Rice.
Oh, okay. In on Rice.
I'm in on Rice. All right. Let me buzz through some of these other teams. I mentioned Army. I'll mention Navy quickly. 5-7 last year. It was Brian Newberry's first year. They're trying to fix their offense too. They hired a guy away from Mercer, the Bears, to come in and revive the rushing attack.
Yeah.
He
Mercer's
runs
solid
something-
program. Yeah.
He runs something called, quote, the millennial version of the wing T offense, which is interesting on a number of levels because Drew Cronick, the name of this gentleman, is not a millennial.
That's okay.
He was born in 1974. I would love more info.
He's got the pulse, Ty.
I'd love more info on how he came to this labeling, but it is a hybrid wing T offense. It should look like a hybrid of the triple option that Navy's been running with the spread option, some combination of those two things. His pedigree is interesting rushing offenses. Navy's a good spot for that. We'll see how it fares. I don't know. I think it makes them interesting. Last year, they were 110th in rushing success rate. Not ideal. Obviously,
Gotta be
there's room
better
for improvement.
Yeah.
We'll see what this dude can do.
At least he didn't call it like the Wing T 4K.
No. Nothing like that.
Jay
No spread
Paterno
HD,
definitely
none of
would
that
have.
crap.
Was that highly dynamic? Highly diversified? What was the HD in that? It wasn't supposed. It was something fun. Continue.
The defense was okay. They were plus 11 in turnover margin. Navy was tied for 4th nationally. In theory, you create turnovers. You slow the game down when you get the ball. If you can move the ball, if you can eat the clock, that's one way to win. And I think that's the way that they're going to try to win. Brian Newberry's pedigree is as a defensive mind. So hopefully if he can join forces with Drew Cronick, again, the dude they brought over from Mercer, if they can revitalize this offense, that put Navy in an interesting spot.
Yeah.
But, we'll see. Again, it's kind of an open question if they can accomplish that.
Every time you say Drew Cronick, I laugh just a little bit. Every time. And sure, that was your mixtape in high school. That was your name. But like, Drew Cronick? You can say that with a straight face? Okay,
Drew
continue.
Cronick. FAU, the Owls, another owl here.
Yeah.
4-8 team. Tom Herman's first year last year. It's notable that FAU has the easiest schedule in the country.
Great.
Also, they got crushed in returning production. Crushed. Lost 34 guys to the portal. They brought in 20. I don't have a whole lot more to add beyond that.
Okay.
I think this is a prolonged rebuild. I don't think this is instantly going to pop. I think we like Tom. Tom Herman's been on the show.
Yeah.
I think we like Tom Herman, and there's a lot there to suggest that he can, in time, build up this program. It's just going to take a while. He's still getting the roster in order. It's just that's really it.
Yeah, Willie Taggart did a full-on bad job.
Yeah, he did.
And
he did.
It's going to take a minute. FAU, with support, is hypothetically one of those places that can build a roster of transfers from the area and win games.
ECU is interesting to me this year.
Down year last year, 3-9, 2-10, something like that.
2-10 last year. The upside is that a good chunk of the underlying numbers, like we don't play the game on paper, but the underlying numbers and that type of thing were better than the final record. They had 4 one-score losses against Rice, Charlotte, Tulane, and Tulsa. 3 of those were at home.
Yeah.
So last year's team was driven almost entirely by its defense. It's a defense that brings a ton back this year.
Okay. I
think we'll continue to see improvement on the defensive side of the ball. Siobhan Revel is the name to know. He's their star corner, almost certainly a future draft pick. He kind of leads the way on defense, but they're again going to be driven by that defense. It's just offense, right? It's a quarterback race between a couple interesting names that you may be familiar with, notably Jake Garcia, who's now on another school.
Oh, that's right. I did see this. Yeah.
Jake Garcia transfers in from Mizzou. Catton Hauser transfers down from Michigan State. I don't think they're going 2-10 again, but I think unless there is market improvement, this could be it for Mike Houston.
Yeah.
Like that was a really good program back in the day, and they have fallen on some hard times here. So he's got to prove, kind of like Neil Brown did last year, that he can turn this thing around and get them on more of an upward trajectory.
Okay. I enjoyed your I hear you, but, and we can give Bill C his choice of like the bowl teams in his special bowl, the teams that don't have 500 records that can go to the underlying numbers bowl. Like, Look, I know these 2, 3, and 9 teams lost all of their medium-sized games.
You know, we find this especially this time of year when we're digging into what did these teams do last year.
Yeah.
More often than not, you've got a bunch of them that were in just a ridiculous amount of one-score games.
Yeah.
I've got one when we talk about the MAC that'll blow your mind.
Okay.
I've got one that is sort of like the king of the stat, but alas, there are many more. We'll talk through them. Let me round this conference out here.
Please.
By talking about the final 5 teams. North Texas, Dan.
Yeah, all gas, no brakes once again.
5-7 a year ago, made a coaching change. Might be Chandler Morris, your starting quarterback?
Probably will be, yeah.
Might be him at quarterback.
Third team? Yeah.
He could be one of 8 new starters on this offense. It was an offense that was good last year.
Mm-hmm.
Had no support on defense whatsoever. None. This was pretty much the worst defense in the country. The numbers here are ridiculous. I mean, 476 yards a game, 37 points per game.
Yeah.
It's impossible to win with numbers like that. And still, they won 5 games, which actually, like, 5-7 is not a great record. It's not the worst. But when you look at those numbers and how bad they were on defense, it's actually kind of impressive that they won any games at all.
Right.
Every game's a shootout when you play like that on defense. So, they've got kind of a retooled front 7 this year. Kind of.
Okay.
They should be better for the Mean Green this year. And the front 7, I think, is where they really need to improve if they want to get better. It needs to be better, if only because it can't possibly, literally cannot get any worse. They were horrible.
Ooh, don't challenge, Ty. Don't you challenge. Don't you lay down that sword.
From a ranking standpoint.
I dare you.
From a ranking standpoint.
Sure.
It cannot get any worse. Maybe it can because there's another team in FBS this year.
Yeah.
So I guess technically it could, but that's a stretch for me. I am concerned about this team because the defense was really bad last year, and there is so much new on offense. But should be a hell of a TV show. Yeah? Mean Green.
I don't know, man. It's probably not a great TV show if you're a North Texas fan.
No, well, we know, and we know from from our Patreon membership that it hasn't been a pleasant watch of North Texas. People talk about North Texas. But
what a challenge you've laid. Can't get worse. It definitely can always get worse, Ty. You've watched the sport long enough to know that this team, this defense, whatever.
It gets worse if they play with 9 men. That's the only way.
Can definitely happen. Against the offenses they'll face, sure.
They don't give red cards in football.
Right.
At least not yet. I don't think it can possibly get any worse than it was last year.
Okay. Fair enough.
UAB, Trent Dilfer, 4-8 last year. The offense was all right. Like, it wasn't horrible.
Jacob Zeno
was the quarterback. You remember him from the Baylor days. He's back. I think 4 or 5 linemen in front of him are back as well. So the offense will be okay. It's just the defense, man. You said it earlier. North Texas was the worst in the country. These guys were second worst. Now, they signed a bunch of defenders in the portal. Again, it's another situation where they have to be better. They have to be better because they can't get much worse. Frankly, though, a year into this, and we'll know more, obviously, come December, it's still looking like a dumb hire.
Right.
You know, when they hired Trent Dilfer, it raised eyebrows like, oh, what are we doing here? Why are they? And they gave their own justification for it, and that's fine. It looks like a bad hire. Who'da thunk? Looks like a bad hire.
Man, which, by the way, reminds me, how many former Baylor quarterbacks are out there right now?
Oh, my God, so many.
So you've got Kyron Drones at Virginia Tech. I think Gary Bohannon is off to BYU.
Yep.
Blake Shapen at Mississippi State.
Yep.
Jacob Zeno at UAB. Is Sawyer Robertson still at Baylor?
I do not know.
Oh, Ty, do you not have like a Sawyer Robertson Google alert set for yourself?
Unfortunately, I deleted it.
Oh, okay. But the undeveloped Baylor quarterback tentacles, like we talk about like the Bill Parcells coaching tree.
Yeah.
The Dave Aranda, it appears Sawyer Robertson is still in Waco.
Excellent.
The undeveloped Baylor quarterback tree, probably improving elsewhere, is probably alone in its specific merit right now in college football.
And Sawyer Robertson will be playing for one of these teams next year after Aranda gets fired. So
yeah, he'll be at Texas State. He'll be somewhere. Yeah.
3 final teams here, and then I'll turn it over to you to talk about Conference USA for a bit.
Yeah.
Tulsa, Charlotte, and Temple. 3 teams that are going to be at the bottom of the conference. Like Kevin Wilson went 4-8 in his first year at Tulsa. Not great from a returning production standpoint. Pretty much the entire front 7 and all but one of the offensive linemen need to be replaced this coming season, which isn't a good start.
Right.
The irony is that the skill position guys are actually pretty good. Like Anthony Watkins at running back is pretty decent. Camden Benjamin out wide is really solid. It just seems like it's going to be too much to overcome not having the trenches sorted out. So I'm not too optimistic about Tulsa this season.
And Tulsa should never be a team that misses bowl games to me.
No, they shouldn't.
Given location, given history, given recent defenses, offensive development, like that should always be a bowl caliber team.
It should be. They've, like you said, they've had a lot of success there.
Yeah.
But it's another situation where they're still trying to get the roster in order.
Yep.
And this year, the returning production thing and their losses in particular are just not helpful.
Right.
Charlotte 3-9 last year, and Biff Poggi, your boys, first year. Their offensive stats were a car crash.
Yes, they were.
An absolute friggin' car crash last season. And they weren't much better on defense. In terms of the SP+, which we know and love on this show, 27 spots worse on offense, 16 spots better on defense, and 5 spots worse on special teams last year versus the year prior. Okay, so some improvement, mostly not, still bad. The intrigue here, though, is that, again, he is going very heavy on the portal and trying to restock the roster. So, didn't quite take year 1. Trying it again year 2. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see if it helps him grow some sleeves this year on his game day getup.
All right. Fair enough.
And last but certainly not least, the Temple Owls. Year 2, under Stan Drayton, they went 3-9. They lost E.J. Warner, their quarterback, to the portal. Feels like a full reboot in year 3, which is not hopeful for Stan Drayton.
That means
it's donezo in all likelihood for Stan Drayton. But, Temple has been a program that's shown patience in the past. I don't know if they're in any great rush to pay a buyout and fire a coach or anything of that nature, but does not appear as if things are pointed in the good direction for the Temple Owls.
Yeah, stop me if this exists for every team in the conference. Counting on a lot of transfers on defense, right?
That's the name of the game, man.
Not generally a great place to be if you've lost a ton of games already. All right, so your champion is who? Memphis?
My champion is Memphis. Yeah,
okay.
My champion is Memphis, but and I didn't want to kind of spoil the American preview by saying this at the top.
Yeah.
But I could not help but feel a bit underwhelmed coming out of my American preview.
Okay.
Especially after, I feel like we have held this conference up for a good long time as kind of like the target that other G5 conferences should aspire to be.
Yeah.
It didn't leave me feeling very
really. I think
optimistic
there's
this
enough
season.
that's intriguing in the top half of the American.
Memphis is interesting.
I think
Tulane is interesting.
Memphis,
UTSA,
Tulane,
USF, those 4 teams. It's 4
USF.
teams.
Yeah, that's kind of enough, though. If you have 4 interesting competitive teams at the top, That means that you're going to get enough good October-November matchups that are meaningful. Hopefully it's not a back-to-back like the American has had, conference championship final game of the week matchup. But I don't know. I think that's a pretty good place to be, especially because we're going to transition right now to Conference USA, which my preview is going to be a lot shorter because there's just not... Look,
that's
at the top is Liberty.
That's okay.
And Liberty alone. Okay? Liberty, ends last season winning the Conference USA championship over New Mexico State, a very good New Mexico State team that had just beaten Auburn before losing to Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. They lose their best receiver to LSU, CJ Daniels. Kaidon Salter returns. The offense should be very good once again. They're going to run the hell out of the ball in that Jamey Chadwell offense. Defense was somewhat average last year. They should be once again. They bring in some bigger school experience transfers. They are the prohibitive favorite to win Conference USA once again because of the level of talent and the level of investment and the level of transfers and what the rest of the conference is dealing with right now. Intriguing enough, Tyson Helton, Hilltoppers, WKU.
Hold on, whoa. What are we doing here?
What?
Is this your first day on the job?
Yeah. Oh, you want, sorry.
There's only one thing you love, Danny. That's danger.
Conference USA.
Ooh.
You got to let me play the stab at the top to really...
You got to be quick, Ty.
Well, I didn't know you were going to keep talking.
Of course I'm going to keep talking. I have a lot to say.
So what are your danger tiers here in Conference USA? Liberty's at the top.
Liberty's alone at the top
Okay.
as a clear contender. And then just in terms of danger, I have WKU and probably Jacksonville State.
Agreed.
And then the rest of the teams are anywhere between non-competitive, new, and, at best a wild card with a new coach or an overhauled roster.
Right.
And that's just how it works. And by the way, Conference USA, and you mentioned this a little bit with the American, I think it's more pronounced in Conference USA. It's a very strange conference.
It's incredibly strange this
So
year.
a ton of turnover, like every conference, but like a ton of like new teams entering the FBS division have entered through Conference USA.
Yeah.
Or
it's the portal for new teams.
Independents joining conferences like New Mexico State recently, Kennesaw State, the Owls, who have only been a program for like 9-10 years, becoming an FBS team, joining Conference USA. Jacksonville State, new. Sam Houston, new. Like, there's just, I don't know. I think Bill Connolly called it the Ellis Island of conferences, just welcoming huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
Yeah. Liberty, by the way, so you're right. I mean, Liberty is, I think, the prohibitive favorite in this conference. A very weird schedule. They've got bye weeks in both week 6 and 8.
Okay.
Which I don't know if I've ever seen before. It seems as if they're trying to stock up. Like they saw the playoff getting bigger in the window, and Jamey Chadwell added a ton of transfers in the front 7. Guys from power conferences, along with some guys from G5 schools. This defense was atrocious last season, and it didn't really matter until the Fiesta Bowl. That's where we saw it on display against Oregon.
Well, that doesn't mean anything. They're not building to compete with Oregon, but yeah.
Doesn't mean anything. They are now, though. I think they kind of see this invitation into the playoffs as a reason to try and stock things up on the defensive side of the ball. And so they've tried to do that. They're going to be able to, again, outscore most of the teams in the conference. They've got that awesome game that we alluded to at the top of the show in week 5 against App State, which could end up being a de facto playing game for the playoffs.
Sure.
And otherwise, otherwise, we're going to be talking a lot about Kaidon Salter and Quentin Cooley, their running back.
Yeah. Yeah. Both very good. Quentin Cooley, transfers from, I think, Wake Forest a couple of years ago. No, Liberty's going to be very good once again. There's not much to add right now. They are just in an advantaged position within Conference USA. I was starting to transition to Western Kentucky before you needed to get in that very sexy intro.
I needed to get in the sexy intro.
I know. I understand.
How big is the gap between Liberty and Western?
Not terribly large because Western Kentucky has a good amount of continuity with Tyson Helton being there now for a few years and bringing in TJ Finley, who has now gone on to play for 4 schools in 5 years.
Beautiful.
LSU, Auburn, last year at Texas State, threw for a tonnage of yards. Now moves into Austin Reed's spot at Western Kentucky. Should be a wide open offense. They need to be a much more balanced offense. They need to stop people a lot more defensively. But there's a good amount of firepower at WKU, and that matchup against Liberty is legit exciting. So it's a tier down, but in terms of danger, it's Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State, and it's Rich Rod. They're going to continue to run the ball well. They need to throw the ball better. They need to play better defense, but there's enough promise at Jacksonville State. And what I was saying about Conference USA, which sort of differs it, the level isn't as high as the American, but the coaching ceilings of just the guys who have tried to reshape their careers as like second or third act type coaches. So it's Jamey Chadwell. It's Mike McIntyre at FIU, Rich Rod at Jacksonville State. Like there's good enough names here. Sonny Cumbie has been a big conference coordinator.
Derek Mason
now at Middle Tennessee. Like there's interesting enough names in this conference that like, I don't have faith that you're going to turn, Middle Tennessee into a 10-2 program or something like that. But I have enough faith that these coaches won't make bonehead sort of newbie mistakes, which I think is an interesting floor to have for a number of these programs.
And the other thing that I would add, you mentioned sort of together in like that feeling dangerous tier, Western Kentucky, Jacksonville State, both have gone out and hired new coordinators to try and fix what ailed them a year ago.
Yeah.
So Western hires Will Friend to come in and be the new offensive coordinator, pretty much hired to come in and fix the rushing attack.
Yeah,
because
last
last
year
year
balance on the ground. Yep.
Yeah, it was all on Austin Reed, as you mentioned. And there's a lot back this year. They got 9 starters back on offense. TJ Finley, if they can give him a little bit more support on the ground, he'll be better for it.
Sure.
And then on the flip side with Jacksonville State, Luke Olson, who I kept referring to as Lute Olson, different guy. He comes in and runs, of course, the aggressive attacking defense, the 3-3-5, that they're hoping can give them a little bit more pop. There's been a lot of turnover on that defense from a year ago. It was a pretty good defense last year, all things considered. But they want a different system that can come in and help them, and especially with so much new. That's interesting. The only other point that I would add about Jacksonville State, Tyler Huff is a really interesting name to me. Tyler Huff is a transfer quarterback from Furman. He had a good run with Furman last year. Curious to see what he looks like in the Rich Rod system.
Sure. Fair enough. Logan Smothers also at Jacksonville State. And Zion, it seems like a full-on quarterback battle. You got Logan Smothers, Zion Turner transfers in from UConn, potential double Zion situation with last year's quarterback being Zion Webb, who had like all the off-field, will he or won't he get on the field to start the year with eligibility stuff. So, yeah, I think Jacksonville State is promising, and when you can run the hell out of the ball, it certainly is advantageous for your own defense. So Jacksonville State should be in an interesting place. And then it's just sort of a morass, right? You have Kennesaw joining the conference, and they've had a coach. He was like almost immediately successful for the Owls, but it's been up and down recently, and they're just going to take a minute to get used to a new level. New Mexico State starting over, sort of. Tony, what are we calling him with John Miller's voice? Tony Sanchez. Who played at New Mexico State. He coached at UNLV, but they got decimated by the portal when Jerry Kill left, including losing Diego Pavia to Vandy with Jerry Kill, who takes over as like a assistant head coach or whatever.
Can I read this off? Can I read off the damage you mentioned?
By all
killed
means,
in the portal.
Yeah.
They lost their top 2 quarterbacks, top 2 running backs, 7 of 8 leading wide receivers, their top 6 defensive linemen, and 11 of 13 defensive backs.
Yeah, that's decimated. I think that counts.
Yeah, agreed.
Which is a shame because they were one of the cooler stories last year, and a program that has been so traditionally down, and Jerry Kill just does nothing but win a good number of games, and did so, and everything got kind of lost in the politics of it all, and everybody falling out of love with each other. But too bad for New Mexico State.
The other thing on Kennesaw, real quick. So Kennesaw, a new FBS team, is the 134th team this year. They run a pistol option.
Great.
Which is fun.
Little Chris Alt action.
Yeah, they've got a lot back. 16 starters back from a year ago. It's just a huge step up. I don't think they're going to come in and take the world by storm. Of course, as we've seen with pretty much every newcomer to FBS outside of James Madison, depth is always an issue. Defense is always an issue. These are kind of constants for schools that take that step up. But I think just their style of play is interesting.
Sure.
It is certainly a bit of a zag as compared to some of the other programs that we're talking about here, which are, more wide open, certainly different than a team like Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is going to be better, but they run just a drastically different system than some of the other schools that they're going to play against, which is neat.
By the way, just on the topic of Zag, UTEP makes a change at head coach, hires Austin Peay's Scotty Walden, and he's doing like the Tyson Helton, Zach Kitley line change, where he's bringing in a bunch of Austin Peay players. Nobody knows how good they'll actually be. UTEP is a tough place to win, but by all accounts, the man runs hot.
Yeah,
the man
he
runs
does
hot.
run hot. He does run hot.
So that's fun, just in terms of like they might go 2-10, but those two might get weird. UTEP is interesting to me. Probably it's a longer term play, but yeah, I'm always rooting for teams like UTEP to rise up.
He's definitely done the line change thing, but there's also, I think, a pretty significant effort to focus more on high school recruiting, especially in Texas.
Sure.
So I think they're trying to like use the immediate levers available to them to put a roster together and jumpstart the program. But the longer term plan is going to be Texas high school recruiting for Scotty Walden.
Has to be. Yeah.
If it works, that's
if it works.
Seeing what the plan is.
FIU has a ways to go, and Mike McIntyre is a quality coach. He's turned programs around like Colorado and San Jose State. They just, I don't know. They're not building out that roster. They're not a transfer destination. They're just, I don't know. They seem doomed to hope to go 500. That's the kind of program that I think is happening right now at FIU.
Did you get transfixed by Kewan Jenkins the way I did?
Who he is great. Yeah, but that's the problem with a program like FIU. Like there's a guy on offense and a guy on defense.
It's a young team, though. It was a young team last year, and in some cases, they seem to get better as the year wore on. And so if we're now in year 3 of Mike McIntyre, if he's as focused on player development as he's seemed to be,
right,
maybe there's a jump this year. I'm not like super optimistic about that. I like their quarterback. I still think they're pretty young across the board. I think we could see some progress there, even if it's not jumping off the page at us.
I worry sometimes when I see that, though, where it's just like they were really young last year. Well, like maybe they were really young because the older players that were in the program didn't like being there or were misevaluated and nowhere near as good. And so what makes these young players that much more promising beyond the adjective young?
Yeah,
and so,
no, you're right. You're right.
That's,
What do we make of Sam Houston, Louisiana Tech, and Middle Tennessee?
Louisiana Tech's in a tough place. It's hard to see them turning around. They had their like very small window with Skip Holtz, and they have this history of building out interesting offenses, but I don't know. It's tough to see this being turned around. Middle Tennessee is interesting because of Derek Mason. He's bopped around as a coordinator these past couple years, but he was able to do interesting things at Vanderbilt, has recruited that state and that region. So it's weird with Middle Tennessee being just like stuck still HQ for as long as it was, to have a new face in there. So I don't know. I'm hopeful that, Derek Mason can Tedfordize Middle Tennessee,
Sure.
where he has some coaching acumen, and if he's re-energized somewhere, that it could be interesting. Sam Houston, still very new and finished the season strong, I believe, last year. So Sam Houston can be, I think, interesting, but another one of those programs that, like, if a left guard gets hurt, the season's over. That, that they don't have the depth, that they don't have the firepower on both sides of the ball. And hopefully they're dangerous. Hopefully they're, again, well coached, because they did have a good amount of success as an FCS program that, within Conference USA, within, a conference that has as many changes and as many sort of average to below average teams, it's begging for somebody to just randomly go 8-4.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, a few, I guess, points of contention or added context that I would add. I mean, Sam Houston lost its first 8 games.
Yeah.
And they just jumped up last year. The offense was terrible. The run game was bad. The defense was good. Now they got to replace a lot this year, but you're right. They did get better. Won their finally beat Memphis.
Yeah.
Or Middle Tennessee,
Not Memphis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Memphis lost to what? Kansas State, Mizzou. They lost to exclusively good teams last year.
Right.
Yeah.
Sam Houston beat a Tennessee school to close out the season last year.
Thank you.
And on that point, Middle Tennessee, like, I think I'm with you. it was the Rick Stockstill show forever.
Mm-hmm.
There is talent on hand there for Derek Mason. There aren't a whole lot of players that knock me over. There are a lot of guys who I look at and I say, hey, they could be all right. They could be all right. But it's a situation where they're learning new schemes on both sides of the ball. Not usually a great formula. Like Holden Willis, the slot receiver, is a lot of fun. But outside of that, I think it's going to be a situation where there's just a lot new again. And, it's going to be a work in progress. I sort of disagree on Louisiana Tech.
Okay.
Sonny Cumbie is 6-18, I want to say, in 2 seasons.
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot pointed in the right direction for Louisiana Tech.
Okay.
Health was a huge issue for this team last year. They got to stay healthy. It is year 3. Year 3 is often when you see some jumps. So I am remaining optimistic. I'm not willing to burn the boats yet when we talk about La Tech.
Lost Hank Bachmeier though, Ty.
They did lose Hank. Yeah. But I'm gonna hold out hope that this could be a year that we see some fortunes start to change.
Okay.
For La
Kind of
Tech.
the bummer here is also within this conference is everything's pointed towards the end of the year when it would have been nice to earlier on get a nice idea of, how vulnerable, if at all, is Liberty. But like they play Western Kentucky, I think late November, and then Western Kentucky plays Jacksonville State maybe the week after that. So it's all sort of, the top seams jammed together at the end of the year.
Yeah. That does it for part 1, boys and girls.
Yes.
Thank you so much for downloading, for listening, for supporting. We would encourage all of you to reach out and let us know what we got right, what we got wrong, what else we should know about your teams, maybe what you are most interested in. The easiest way to do that, solidverbal@gmail.com. You can, of course, reach out to us across any of our social media platforms. We've got all of them, I think, at this point. So reach out, let us know your thoughts on any of these previews. In part 2, we're going to talk about the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, and the MAC, and that episode is coming up next week. After that, we've got all sorts of power conference previews that we're going to do. I think we're going to go in the order of the ACC, the Big 12, then the SEC, then the Big 10.
Great.
So a lot coming your way over the next 5 weeks or so. It feels really good to do this again.
Yeah, baby.
It's a lot of cramming for you and I. A lot of cramming to get used to new names, new places, and new situations. But it always feels really redeeming to do a show like this, to talk it all out and see where we agree and disagree. So I'm excited.
What year was the Magna Carta signed? You probably crammed that information at a certain point.
Definitely.
1514? 1512?
No idea. I thought it was in the 13s.
1520?
Couldn't tell you.
I think it's 15s. Magna Carta signed. Here we go. 1215.
Oh, I guess I would win
Flipped
that.
it. Yeah, you were closer.
I was closer.
Damn.
This is fun. Part 2 coming your way. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe if you made it this far. We'd love to have you with us all season long. Verballers.com is where you can go for bonus content, ad-free episodes, and all of the fun tricks that we're going to unveil here in a few short weeks as the season gets a little bit closer. But Dan Rubenstein, one of our many previews now officially in the books.
Love it. Can't wait.
For that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hillenbrand, thanks again for downloading, for listening, for supporting. Hit follow, hit subscribe, leave a rating, leave a review. We'll talk to y'all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.